Hello and welcome. My name is Kolby Van Camp.
And my name is Jesse Kaiser. Welcome to our podcast, Musically Inclined.
Musically Inclined is a program all about exploring music and the vast and interesting topics that surround it.
Whether that be discussing composing, music software, music history, or interviewing professionals, we've got you covered.
You can find us and stream us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever podcasts are found.
Special thanks to our podcast host program, Zencaster and Libsyn, for helping us make this happen. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome to Musically Inclined. My name is Kolby Van Camp.
And I am Jesse Kaiser. Welcome to tonight's episode.
Yes, thank you for waiting a week for us. We had some technical difficulties last week. There was, often it's me who has the thunderstorms out here in the Great Plains, and it's not often that you have like a thunderstorm like that in South Carolina, but there was one last week, and it just wreaked havoc on Jesse and I getting together, and also finals and dead week and everything like that. So it kind of worked out, I think, in all of our best interests. But nonetheless, it is good to be back with you all this evening talking about music, because this is kind of one of the best parts of my week.
Yep. Strong winds equal fallen trees. Fallen trees equals damaged power lines. So, yeah, power outages, all that good kind of stuff. Just everything seemed to be working against us last week. But like Colby said, we are back, and we are going to lead into tonight's episode with our well-beloved segment, The Composer's Corner. I'm going to go first this week. So I do want to talk about two pieces by the composer Arvo Pärt. He's very well known. There was, I believe, a ranking some time ago where he was ranked as the world's #1 performed living composer, which would not surprise me. He's been at it for years, and he writes a lot of great music, and he's very influential. But anyway, in recently having finished my piece Magnificat, which we'll be talking more about, I took some time to listen to Arvo Pärt's Magnificat to get some inspiration, as well as his Nunc Dimittis. If you're unaware, the Magnificat and the Nunc Dimittis are two texts that go hand in hand. They're usually two separate pieces. So I've been listening to both pieces in equal respects to get some inspiration.
I actually sang the Nunc Dimittis a couple of years ago with K-State, and it was really interesting.
That
was an interesting piece.
Yeah, and they're both fabulous pieces, and they're both representative of Pärt's self-invented compositional style known as tintinnabuli, which is really fascinating. You can read all kinds of studies and such about it. But both pieces are fabulous, and what's interesting with the Magnificat specifically, with that piece being the setting of the same text that I was setting, I was really looking for some ideas from the great composer himself on how to set that text, because for a while it was a big struggle for me just trying to find a way to set that text effectively and concisely. I think was the main struggle for me, and Arvo Pärt, I feel like he did it tremendously. So it's definitely pieces you should go check out, the Magnificat and the Nunc Dimittis, both by Arvo Pärt. And please just go listen to anything by Arvo Pärt. He's a tremendous composer, and he's one I've learned a lot from. We've talked about him pretty commonly in seminars at the University of South Carolina, so he's definitely worth checking out. Go listen to his music.
Awesome. Yeah, Pärt has some really interesting music out there, and as a choral musician, as a choral composer, I've often sat and listened to some of Pärt's. I'd say he's a pretty minimalist composer. Yeah. And so I like what he does. He has some very interesting music out there.
If you're a choral musician in the modern era, you need to know about Arvo Pärt, because his choral music is some of the most important, if not the most important, in the modern era. We talk about other like we've talked about Eric Whitacre a lot on this show. His music is certainly important, but Arvo Pärt, I feel like, is the one that we need to urge more composers and musicians to listen to, because I would argue he's probably more important. So, yeah, but again, go check his stuff out. You won't regret it, I assure you.
Yeah. So moving into the music that I had been listening to this week, it's actually, I had never heard of this composer or this music before until last Friday. I had my last meeting. So I'm in an ensemble called Madrigal and Motet Ensemble here at K State. I was actually a founding member, and essentially we just sing Renaissance music. It's one on a part, really cool stuff. And we just show up, and often we just show up in sight ring stuff, sight read. The tintinnabulation is still on my mind.
Ba-ding, ba-ding,
um,
ba-ding.
Sight read music that comes from the Renaissance era. Our teacher, Mr. Wood, who we are definitely having on this show because that man is a walking encyclopedia. He's forgotten more about Renaissance music than most people ever know, and it's a real honor to get to study with him.
Yeah.
Um, but he comes to us and he has this great tenor voice, and it's myself and a good buddy of mine, Jacob. He's a composer as well, and a bass, and then a friend of mine, Ryan. And by the way, Ryan gave a very fantastic recital last night. He's a tenor. He's in my voice studio. I've known him for a long time. We were freshmen together, and he gave a very excellent senior recital last night on French music. It was all music about animals, and so it was kind of like he did like a vocal version of the Carnival of the Animals, but it was more vignettes
That's
of
cool.
different animals. It's really interesting. I didn't
Yeah.
understand a word he was saying because it was all in French, and I don't speak French, and I don't like singing in French. But it was really cool. So definitely, I think he's going to put that on YouTube. If he does, definitely check him out. Ryan Hernandez, the tenor. That was a really great recital, and I was happy that I was able to be there and listen to that. But anyway, long story short, after I've plugged all these people, Mr. Wood comes to us and he says, "Hey, I want you to sight read these pieces with me by a composer named John Shepherd, and he died in 1558, and he has three settings of In Manus Tuas, and Mr. Wood brought us the second and third settings to look
Very cool.
at, and they are gorgeous,
Yeah, that's an old
absolutely
composer.
astoundingly gorgeous. The counterpoints, there's some very Purcell-esque stuff in there.
Nice.
There's some chromatic relationships that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate from seeing from someone in 1558. But it's just, oh man, it was beautiful. And I strongly recommend listening to it. In fact, I pulled it up here because I want to make sure it's on Spotify so I could share it with all of our listeners here. The album that you can listen to this on is Music for Compline by Talis, Bird, and Shepherd. And the ensemble is Stile Antico. It was recorded in
Mhm,
2007. Definitely recommend giving that a listen
mhm.
because it's just gorgeous stuff. And then also, I just need to put this out there because this is a complete 180 if there ever was one. But last night, driving back from Manhattan to Topeka, with my fiance after Ryan's recital, um, I told Anna, I said, you know what I want to listen to? I want to listen to Uptown Funk, and and I played that piece, and I just wanted to come on here and say that I'm not a stick in the mud, and I don't listen to exclusively classical music.
Neither of
And
us do.
Uptown Funk, that song slaps. So go listen to it again, man. Like that, I hadn't listened to it in probably 5 years, and
Yeah.
it just hit me. I was kind of like humming it to myself, and I turned to Anna. I said, "You need to turn it on," and she did.
Yeah.
And I cranked up the volume in my car and the bass, and we blasted it. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Go listen to it.
Yeah, I do think it's important for us to articulate that we're not total snobs. We do listen to other music, I listen to mostly EDM in the car. I actually pretty rarely listen to classical music in the car, believe it or not. I do listen to it all the time for my own leisure, but it's usually when I'm sitting at my desk. In the car, I'm usually listening to something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not total snobs. But while he's talking about recordings, for the two Arvo Pärt pieces I was just mentioning, um, there are two recordings I can advise for both of those pieces. The one that I listened to at first was either the North Dakota or the South Dakota chorale.
Hmm.
Either one of those two. They made recordings of both pieces on their album Sacred Songs of Life and Love, where they also did a bunch of other really interesting pieces. It's just an
Let me
amazing
guess.
album.
Let me guess. The second one that, especially for the Nunc Dimittis, you listen to Voces 8.
Yes, that's the one.
Yes. All
Uh,
right.
for the
I
se-
know my ensembles. Let's
for
freaking go.
for the second one, Voces 8, obviously, we all know about Voces 8. They're pristine, and they made pristine recordings of both these pieces
Yeah.
for their latest project. And I want to recommend both of them because they came out with their recordings of those pieces later, um, which so they're now the recordings that I listen to. But before the Voces 8 recording, I was listening to those recordings by, I believe it was the North Dakota. But again, it could be either the Dakotas
South Dakota State
chorale.
has a very prominent chamber chorale, so I bet it's the
Yeah,
South Dakota State chamber
I
chorale.
one of the Dakotas, but yeah, either of those recordings are good, but I would advise the Voces 8 one because they just sound pristine. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that I nailed that. I was thinking to myself, it's got to be Voce 8. If it's not, then I'm going to eat my hat and also recommend Voce 8. Um, but great. Cool. So also, while we're kind of doing this like composer's moment, Jesse finished his Magnificat. And I really wanted to kind of pick his brain about it. One, because I'm dying to hear it. And two, because I just kind of want to get your thought process about it. And then I also have a piece that I've actually made some breakthroughs on. So hit me with yours first, and then I'll talk about mine.
Okay, yes. So I have talked about that I've been writing a setting of the Magnificat for the last few episodes now, and I have finished it finally. It's a pretty long awaited piece for me. The commission came some time ago, so to have it off my plate now is pretty relieving. Um, it was really kind of an intimidating piece, because it was a piece for a much bigger project. It was commissioned by a choir called the King's Counterpoint, who I sing with in Charleston, South Carolina. Go check them out. We are going to be uh, having a residency at Canterbury Cathedral in England this summer, very soon. And so I wrote this piece for that occasion, which is kind of intimidating
Yeah.
because, I'm writing it for Evensong at Canterbury Cathedral. And it's intimidating because if you just Google Evensong, Canterbury Cathedral is the first thing that pops up. So it's very, it's a little bit intimidating. Um, but I was able to get through it regardless of that. Um, and I was talking about listening to Arvo Pärt's Magnificat to get some inspiration because for a while I was really struggling with the piece because I was trying to find a way to um, write it, in a way that evokes the text, but is also very concise. I really tried to write music that's functional for whatever it's being written for. So I didn't want it to be too long. I wanted it to be something that was nice and meditative, and I also wanted it to pair nicely with the Nunc Dimittis by Paul Smith, which is the piece that it's paired with. Um, so I'm, also listening to that piece and trying to, dissect that piece so I can make the Magnificat pair with it in a really nice way. So there are all these challenges that I'm posed with, but I think with the final product, I was able to achieve that. It's a very chant driven setting. um, I wrote basically my own chant tune to go along with it. Um, the whole piece is really just, if it's not chant, then it's a bunch of chords that are chanted ad libitum. Um, so it's pretty much an entirely chant driven piece, and there are a few reasons for that. One is, to kind of fit the mood of Evensong, to just kind of get that meditative quality. And two, quite frankly, it's to get through all that freaking text. The
Hmm.
Magnificat is a long text.
How long is your
And
setting? Like, what's a time code for it?
oh gosh, I don't even know. It's like maybe 3 to 4 minutes, something like that. It's pretty short for the
For the
length of
whole
the
thing?
yeah, which is not bad for the length of the text. Um, Again, very long text, and if I were to set it, going through that text, at a more leisurely pace, it would probably end up being an 8 minute piece. That's just how long the text is, and I was trying to just get through it in a musical way, which is one of the biggest struggles. But I really just use some kind of basic techniques, really, just to um, give the piece a nice, well-rounded quality, but also keep it simple and get through that text as quick as I can.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that's how that piece ended up turning out. and I'm sure, we're definitely going to get a solid recording of this piece. So I'll definitely be letting you all know when you can go listen to it.
Yeah.
For now, I'm going to keep it from you. So, but I will let you know when you can go listen to that piece. So look forward to it.
Cool. Very exciting stuff. Yeah, I'm really interested to get to hear that. And from the occasional picture that you put on your Instagram, by the way, go follow Jesse on Instagram at jessykaiser.jpg.
Yeah.
That quality
Yeah.
handle there. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've been very interested by what I've been
Yeah.
seeing in the pictures that you've been putting out
I
there.
like posting if you follow me, I like posting the last pages of my pieces as a little bit of a teaser. Um so you could expect to see more of those for future pieces as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in a similar vein, I've kind of had a breakthrough with some music that I've been writing recently. Um, I I finished the Kyrie for my Requiem, which, oh my goodness, it's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of this because I actually sat down and the Kyrie is all aleatoric. So that means it's left up for chance, and the singers just kind of sing it however they want within the confines of the pitches that I give them.
Mhm.
Um, and it has a bunch of chords that phase in and out on top of a solo or underneath a solo. And I actually sat down with my microphone here a couple days ago, and I just sang through the first 2 pages, and it sounded dope. And I was kind of like, I don't usually come out and say I thought that sounded really cool, but this one I was very proud of. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's going to blow people's socks off when they hear it.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. So I'm excited about
Yeah.
that. Just like slowly plugging away because a requiem is definitely not something you can sing in 8 minutes.
Right.
So I'm looking at maybe an hour and a half. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's going to be huge,
It's a big
but
undertaking.
yeah, but it's an undertaking. It's a labor of love. I've been enjoying
Right.
it very much. But the piece that I've really had a breakthrough with every once in a while in my composition process, especially if I'm working on something that's really long, I just need to set it aside for a while. I've done some really good stuff in the last weeks. I need to let it
Yeah.
marinate a little bit, set it aside, and I busted out some pieces that I've been working on. In 2019, concert choir at Kansas State went and sang at the National Collegiate Choral Organization (NCCO) national conference. We were invited. We submitted and were invited. Um, and it was at the University of Maryland um, in Baltimore, I think. And so we went out there and we spent a lot of time. We spent a week in Washington, D.C. before we went and sang at this conference. And we actually went to the National Holocaust Museum, and that was one of the most powerful experiences that I think I've ever had.
Mm.
And there were quotes all over the walls that were just leaping off the walls at me that were like screaming, "This needs to be music that needs to be heard."
Yeah.
And I took a collection of all those texts, um, and I've compiled them into a song cycle that I'm not going to go too much into detail about it because I don't want to spoil it for you. Um, but I've compiled it into a song cycle, and I've finally decided on a title, and I'm going to call it "We Shall Not Forget."
Hmm.
And I've just kind of broken through with some of these pieces, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited for what has
Yeah.
come out of that, and I think that there's a potential to do something really, really special with that. I texted Jesse the other day. I think this is going to be some of the most important music that I've ever written
Yeah.
so far, and it might end up being that way permanently. I don't know, but as of right now, this is very important music to me. So I'm really excited for it. I've been in a good groove. I've been cranking stuff out. So yeah, we've
Yeah.
again our lives have mirrored each other in that we've sat down and really done some good work in the last
Yeah.
couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we always talk about our own works, to each other. So I mean, it kind of makes sense that we kind of do mirror each other sometimes because we'll talk about what we're working on, what our struggles are, and so we do kind of help each other in the process a little bit. I did text Colby in a little bit of distress when I was working on the Magnificat, because again, I was talking about all those struggles, and they can get you down sometimes. It can get really stressful,
Yeah.
and so sometimes you just need your buddy to back you up and tell you everything's going to be okay. So,
Hey, I'm
um,
I'm I'm glad to help a brother out. What can I say?
yeah, so yeah, but yeah, so it's not all peachy keen for us, all the time. We're on here on the podcast a lot of times giving advice, but we have to take our own advice sometimes. So, it's still a struggle bus for us. So
Yeah,
so it's important to make that clear to all of you out there listening, that we're with you on this ride together, uh
yeah,
as
for sure.
colleagues.
Yeah. So, with that, we're going to actually step into our topic for tonight. And that is like just a general overview how to start composing. If you are somebody that has said to yourself, I'm a musician, whether that be I'm a somebody who casually plays the guitar for my worship band at church, or I have a metal band, or I've been singing in choir for 10 years and
Yep.
I've decided that I have this voice in my head and I want to write it, and I want to make this sound. I want to get this out on paper. And how do I do that? What are some
Hmm.
ways to start cultivating that? So we have some of our beginning tips down for
Hmm.
you. And then later
Yep.
episodes, we can get into more advanced stuff. But the first way that I need to be able to tell you is that we can get into more advanced stuff is that if you reach out to us, the only way that we can know what you're thinking is if you contact us. You can follow us on Instagram at musically inclined PC. That is again at musically inclined PC. You can also email us podcast.musicallyinclined@gmail.com, and we would love to hear from you and kind of delve into different topics that you would want us to talk about. So that's my
Hmm.
first unashamed plug for you, the audience, to start getting in contact with us because we
Yep.
genuinely want to hear from you.
Yep.
But the first kind of thing that we've been talking about, we have a Google Doc that we put all our ideas in, and it's just kind of working the process. What are basic concepts to think about? And I think some of the four general concepts to think about are a most basic of basic instruments. What are you going to be writing for? Is it going to
Hmm.
be a chamber orchestra? Is it going to be a choir? Is it going to be just piano? Is it going to be just flute? I mean, what are you going to be working for? Um, the next thing go hand in hand, and they are um, all three of these go hand in hand. And I'm actually going to rearrange this order as I'm looking at it because this is more exclusively choral vocal. But if you have text, what text are you going to set? I think virtually anybody will say that it's rather ineffective to write a bunch of music and then try and find a text that fits the music. It's just
Oh
not going to happen. Don't do that
god.
to yourself. Um, I strongly recommend finding a text first and then using the text to inform how you write your music. So that's kind of like the side note to what kind of
Yeah.
instruments you're going to be using. But then the two basic like building blocks of music, rhythm and pitch. What kind of rhythms do you want to use? What kind of pitches do you want to use? Do you want to limit yourself to a specific key? Do you want to limit yourself to just a collection of pitches like a hexachord or the pentatonic scale or something like that? So I think that there are numerous things we can talk about in there. But yeah, those kind of our beginning building blocks. What are the basic things to think about when you're going to start first composing?
Hmm. Yes, and I do want to say, talking about, if you have that instinct within you that says, if you're just a performing musician and you have that, voice inside you that's telling you to write something, that's where we all start. So I encourage you to follow it. It can be a really intimidating thing because you're surrounded by all these composers that people talk about, and you think, why should I try to do that? But that shouldn't be the question that you're asking, you know because ultimately it's all about you expressing yourself, and that's what's the most important. So
Yeah,
if you do have that voice inside you telling you to do it, you should do it, because you know if anything, it's just a way to express yourself, and it could eventually lead to something bigger. You never know. So it's definitely something that you should, um, follow. Uh, but yes, so yeah, follow that voice if it's inside you.
yeah. So we have some basic parameters, and the key to your initial success is going to be how you set the basic parameters for yourself. If you're just going to try and jump into the ocean of composing, and you're just going to launch in and then try and sit in the middle of the ocean, good luck. You're going to get salt poisoning and you're going to swell up and die, because it's not going to work for you. And if it does, then you're Mozart. And there's only one of you that exists every 400 years. So,
Yeah.
or longer. So you're a once
Yeah.
in a multi generational person. So if you are that person, congratulations. You suck. I'm just kidding. But, um,
Fooled
but
you.
yeah, the here's the our basic parameters. So I have a composition student, and what I tell my student is that I often say, I want you to just write 16 measures. That's it. I just want you to write 16 measures. 16 measures is great. It's a number that's divisible by four. And usually composers start writing in groups of two or four. So that would be four groups of four, or, eight groups of two. Um, so 16 measures is a great number to start with. And then we just utilize the concepts that we were talking about for the instruments that we were talking about. So if you're a pianist and in your lesson and you came to me and you said, I want to start writing music for piano, great, we're going to start writing music for the piano. Or I know how to play the violin, but I don't know anything about the piano, but I want to write piano music. Great. Let's start talking about the instrument that you know how to play with first, and then we'll work our way into
Mhm.
piano music. Start with something that you're comfortable with. But 16 measures, it's kind of like a golden number for me. And I think that that works really well for a lot of people. It's not too long, it's not too short, gives you time to actually create an idea without running out of that idea. Kind of makes you work for it a little bit too. So I think 16 measures is a really great starting place in terms of length, for a beginning composition.
Yeah. And if we're to zoom out a bit, what Colby's talking about really plays into the whole idea of building a box for yourself. You know, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, enforcing rules that you cannot break. I know that this seems counterintuitive if you're not familiar with composing, because you're probably just thinking, why in the world would I want to put a creative restriction on myself? I want to, you know, just really emphasize that it's not putting a limit on your creativity. Rather, it's more about being creative within boundaries. Again, that may sound like the same thing, but it's not. Let me explain. So, one thing that we talk about as composers, and it's something that Igor Stravinsky talked about a lot, and I think it's really important. He talks about the just being paralyzed by absolute freedom. So, in today's day and age, as a composer, the sky is the limit for what you can do, for what kind of piece you can write, what kind of ideas you can work with. And just because you have that sheer magnitude of possibility right in front of you, it can be really intimidating and it can paralyze you, quite frankly, because there's no guidelines to kind of guide you in a path to writing a piece or finishing a piece, because there's just so much that's possible. It can be just tough to make a choice. And that's not something that only applies to music. It applies to all sorts of things. So what can really help you in writing a piece is, you know, setting a goal for yourself. What kind of piece is it that I want to write? And that can mean absolutely anything. And from that idea, you can basically build a roadmap for yourself. We've talked about this before, building a roadmap for your piece. And through building a roadmap for your piece, you make the process much easier for yourself, because there's a way forward now. The scope is now visible, as opposed to just going into it blind, which is just making it so much harder for yourself. So, creating boundaries for yourself can really be a useful way to get through a piece. If you don't do that, you're basically just held in shackles by just the sheer amount of things you can do. You have a million decisions to make, and just trying to tackle all those decisions head on is usually a very painful and fruitless venture. So I would advise you not to do that, and really just try to give yourself a box to work in, some walls for you to push against. And it can be really strict, like what Colby's talking about with the 16 measures, or it can be a looser box. There are various levels of tightness and looseness that this box can be, but just defining it is very important because and you have ultimate creative freedom within that box, but the box is still there. But you can do whatever you want with the information that you have. So I would definitely advise, especially to younger composers or composers who are first starting out, no matter the age, to set those boundaries for yourself because it will make your job easier. Trust me.
Yeah.
It goes for all composers.
Yeah, and to kind of, so I have multiple like little notes here in our Google Doc that I can tie into that. And the first that I want to say is that be prepared to fail, and it's definitely okay. Um,
Yeah.
all of us have failed in literally everything. Like it's just okay if you think you're gonna go into music or composing, especially, and you're just going to create something and it's going to be great and it's going to be fresh off the press. Again,
Think again.
I think again, unless you're Mozart, and if you are, again, I hate you. But
Let's just forget about that guy. He doesn't matter. Not one of you out there is Mozart, I guarantee it, especially if you're listening to us. So, so
wow, way to alienate our listeners, Jesse. You went right out there and you punched him in the face.
well, and I
You
don't
know
mean
what?
that in a demeaning way.
I
Just, it's just like, you know, it's really a humbling yourself type of thing, because it is really important if you're a composer is to really embrace the learning experience. So it's important to articulate that.
Yeah. Well, and I know that I say that in jest, but also if for whatever reason I want to believe that there is a Mozart among us somewhere, and that that person is indeed listening to us. So screw you, Jesse. I think that I think that the future Mozart is listening to us.
Okay.
And I you can have your side of the coin. I'm going to be the opposite side,
Hmm.
which is ironic because I'm a self-proclaimed nihilist. I'm just kidding. I'm not. But but okay,
Yep.
bringing it back in.
Yep.
So
We are
what I would,
totally joking, by the
yes,
way.
we
We
are
don't
just
mean
we're
to
just
insult
messing around.
anybody.
Yeah, we're just messing around. But what I really do think is something that's important is that you do need to be prepared to fail, and that's okay. That's a bigger life lesson. Just be
Yes.
prepared to fail, and that's okay because you're
Yeah.
going to learn something more important about failing than you will from succeeding. And then also when you start composing, the first question you should ask yourself is, what kind of music are you trying to write? Are you trying to actually write
Yeah.
something that's notation based, or are you trying to do something in a DAW with your MIDI controller? If you have a genre that you're interested in or a style that you're passionate about, run with that. In the beginning, if you're trying to generate ideas from a style that you aren't as familiar with or not very interested in, it'll be detrimental to you. So if you are a metal person, if you like death metal, but you're like, I want to go write a sonata like Beethoven, don't do that. Don't do that. Start with a ballad. Use stuff that you
Yeah.
work with. And it kind of ties into what Jesse said. As composers, we're only as good as the music we ingest. And if that's the kind of music you listen to, then your music that you write is going to be very influenced by that. Again,
Yeah.
I'm very influenced by Eric Whitacre, Owen Park, Jake Narvarud, Eric Eschenwalds, and Rachmaninoff. Those are kind of like my top 5 guys whose music I see in my own music. And that's on purpose. I listen to those guys all the time.
Yeah.
So that's just something that comes with time and experience. But I really wanted to say that I liked what Jesse had to say about creating boundaries for yourself where you kind of push against the box. And I wanted to tie it into a weightlifting reference. If you're going to go, I know you're going to hit the squat rack, and you've never squatted before, obviously you have an idea of what you can do, probably based off of how strong you actually are, and you just kind of know, but then also how much you weigh, how tall you are. I'm 6'3", so someone who's 5'5" is going to have to work a lot less hard for a lot more weight than I would because my legs are longer, simply because of that. But
Hmm.
in this hypothetical scenario, if you put not enough weight on, you're not going to get any gains. But if you put too much weight on, you're going to destroy your back and like seriously injure
Yeah.
yourself. So it's all about finding a happy medium. Everything that
Yeah.
we're prescribing to you, as the fake doctors of composition that we are, we suggest a happy medium, right?
Yeah.
So and that's applicable to literally everything in life. You can overdose
Yeah.
on vitamins, you can get not enough vitamins, and both will
Right.
kill you. So I mean,
Yeah.
this isn't like going to actually like kill you in a
Yeah.
physical sense, but it,
Right.
it it could hurt you like mentally
Oh
if you're
yeah.
trying to get this stuff out but you can't. And it's
Yeah.
all about the parameters that you set for yourself. So definitely
Yeah.
do something in the middle.
Yeah, as opposed to physical weight, the weight, is represented by, all those possibilities that I was talking about. It's the same thing. If you have all those possibilities weighing on your back, it'll break you. So,
Yeah.
and, mental strain from composing is a real thing. Don't underestimate it. I was just talking about how I was, texting Colby in some real distress. It can eat away at you sometimes, and you need to be ready. And composing is as serious a profession as anything else. I think a lot of people like to look at composing. You look at the sun and there's a gleam in your eyes, and all of a sudden you write a symphony. It's not like that. It's just like
Oh my gosh.
it's very it's just as hard work as anything else. And it can be really stressful, and so you need to be willing to put that work in, just like you would do any other job. So I do want to emphasize that. But so talking about ideas, what I have next here is about finding an idea that writes itself and not forcing an idea to work. Now, if you're not, you know, a composer yourself, this might sound a bit confusing to you. Finding an idea that writes itself, what does that mean? So, I guess what I mean by finding an idea that writes itself is kind of like, as humans, with whatever we do, we get in the zone sometimes. We go on autopilot. We just do what, comes to our head because we have our better senses about us. And so when I talk about finding an idea that writes itself, a lot of times, and this was an instance um, that I came across while writing the Magnificat, I was trying to force ideas to work. Um, and in doing so, I would get stuck because, and a lot of times it was maybe because I didn't maybe, you know, like articulate to myself the restrictions that I was going to work within too explicitly. So, again, I think what chained me was the fact that there were so many things that I could do to continue this piece, right? And and because of that, I just had no way forward. I hadn't, set out that roadmap as good as I should have. And so I ended up getting lost. It really is what it feels like. You're trying to work with an idea, but it's not taking you many places, and you just get lost. You lose your way. Um, so this is where I think finding an idea that writes itself is really useful. And part part of that is, you know, really being specific about those restrictions you're going to place on yourself, and also really, you know, making a path for yourself to follow. You know, you're not going to go somewhere, you know, if you're trying to get from point A to point B and you're not familiar with that path, you're not just going to go without a map or without a GPS. You
Yeah.
know, you're going to want those tools to help you get there. And in composing, you make that map for yourself in whatever way that is. And so, in those instances where I haven't done that as well as I should have, and again, you know, I've written here, I have to remind myself of things like this because even I forget it sometimes, because sometimes maybe I can be a bit, just blinded by, or maybe I can get tunnel vision, I think is a better way to describe it, because man, I love this idea. Oh, I think it sounds so good. And, I won't think about, I need to step back a little bit and think about how I'm going to write this piece. But then I'm just like, nah. And then I just go in, you know, balls to the wall with this
Hmm.
idea. But if I'm not careful, then I can end up kind of losing my way, which is what happened a few times with the Magnificat. So I think that's the best way I can describe it is, find an idea that works on its own. Don't try to force anything to work. You don't want to have any sense that you're really just pushing hard on something and forcing something when it doesn't feel right. And I know that that might sound really, weird if you're not a composer, but the feeling once you come across it.
Hmm.
You just don't want to feel like anything's forced. Everything wants to feel natural and good. nothing ever wants to feel forced in music. So just try to, you know, work through all those ideas, get rid of the bad ones, and, just keep going until you find one that feels really natural and good, that flows in a really nice way.
Yeah.
I think is the best way I can describe it.
So kind of I like to take what we've been talking about and trying and create a different metaphor out of it, a different kind of anecdote so that it's relatable to people who are musicians and people who aren't musicians who may or
Mhm.
may not be listening to our show. And so in this anecdote that I have, Jesse, before the show we were talking and he said, bro, I totally just downloaded Minecraft. And I was like, yeah, heck yeah, I have a server. Come join me. And as he was talking, I was just thinking about, have you ever built a house in Minecraft and you messed up your base and you
Right.
messed up the foundation of this house and you had this dope idea in your head, but then you messed up the foundation, but you were like, I don't want to fix that because that
Right.
took a lot of time to build. So I'm just gonna keep making it work. And then you end up coming up with something that might not look very good and it
Yeah.
might not be very efficient for the game that you're trying to play. That's kind of what I think Jesse is talking about. And kudos to you, hats off to you if you're a composer that's able to take maybe a suboptimal base that you began with and then still make it flourish into something, and that's okay. You can kind
Yeah.
of discover that, and that's one of those things where Jesse talked about that it's just kind of you as an individual will have to spend a lot of time figuring out what it means for you to stop running an idea into the ground, and when you do, you'll understand what that means. And again, that's a time game that we're playing, all of us are playing, that we just need to spend time doing the activity before we'll kind of realize what it means to us. Um, Everybody has their limit though, and it's totally fine once you understand what that limit is and you've hit it to set that idea aside. I think it was Jesse who, again before our pre thing, and I don't see it here in our notes, and maybe I'm just skimming and overlooking it. But if I steal your thunder here, I don't mean to.
No, go
But you
ahead.
were talking about how masterpieces um, are the usually accidental, right? And
Yeah.
it's very rare that somebody sits down as a composer and says, "I'm going to write something that's going to last forever." And you just sit
Mhm.
down and you write it. And it's like, bam, there it is. Everybody loves it. It's an initial success. And then it continues on for decades and hundreds of years and whatever. And, most of those are happy accidents. And as a composer, you write with the hope that all of your pieces become something like that, knowing that if you're lucky, maybe one of them do. And I think that that's something really important to remember, that if you're actively looking for the work, the masterpiece, it's like dating. If you're actively looking for the person, you're probably not going to find the person, right? It's
Right.
usually you find the person that you're meant to be with as a happy accident, bumping into somebody on the sidewalk. It could literally be something
Right.
as arbitrary as that.
Yeah.
So don't force that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, that was a point that I wrote down here. Don't focus on writing a masterpiece. So I find that this is something that happens a lot with younger composers. As Colby was saying, they're just like, man, I'm going to write this next masterpiece. I'm convinced of it. They want to write the next big, you know, successful ballet score following up to Rite of Spring or something like that. And what that does is, although it might seem uh positive, because it's just like, oh yeah, well, because that's great because they feel like they have the ability to do that. Sure, but it's kind of dangerously naive. If you do that, it actually might end up killing your confidence, because what ends up happening when you try to write that masterpiece, you become very self-judgmental. It's a huge setback, and you judge your work too harshly as a result of that, because you want everything to be perfect, and you become your own worst enemy. I'm certainly guilty of this. I have a lot of personal experience with this. You become your own worst enemy, and nothing you ever do is good enough, because you just want everything to be perfect, because you're going to write that masterpiece. But what works better is if you just kind of abandon that mindset. Easier said than done, I know, but just what works better is abandoning that mindset, not focusing on writing a masterpiece, but just, focusing on just honestly just getting through it and just getting to the end and not, holding putting this, substantial weight on this piece that's really not necessary, because the only person who, cares that much about it is you. And, it can really be, not only can it be a setback for your writing, but it can also be really mentally draining for you. And again, I'm speaking from personal experience. I know how, draining it used to be for me when I was, too hard on myself because my music, quote unquote, was not good enough. And, really ultimately you're lying to yourself because you get into your head about these things. And it's really, I think, the most important to just try stuff out and have fun with it. Composing should be fun.
Hmm.
And because, you're messing around with stuff, you're trying new things, you're expressing yourself. That should be a fun thing to do. It shouldn't be draining. So, I think a good way to approach it is to try to find ways to make it fun. Don't put a bunch of pressure on yourself. That's advice that I need to take from myself all the time to this day. But, it's really important because, if you do that to yourself, if you put a lot of pressure on yourself, that's an easy way to hate composing, and you don't want to do that. So just focus on really just, expressing yourself. And, don't be, what's the word, uh complacent. Don't be complacent about it.
Sure.
Don't be, just not caring about it. Don't be nonchalant about it. Care about what you're writing, but don't put that unnecessary weight on it. It's a healthy balance.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it's important to recognize that that kind of mindset definitely puts a lot of unnecessary and unhealthy pressure on yourself in literally anything. If you think that if you're a business person and you think that you're going to be the guy that sells the stock market and you're going to make millions of dollars for your company, probably not. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. It's good to have those kind of goals. Like, definitely have those goals, because if you don't have any goals, then you're not going to do anything. But definitely have those goals, but also be realistic with yourself. You know, you're an athlete and you're a football player and you want to play in the NFL, that's a great goal. Shoot for that goal 100%. And if you don't make it, that's fine, because guess
Yeah.
what? Like 1,000 people get let into the NFL every year,
Yeah.
so like that's a that's
Right.
a that's a very small percentage of people if it compared to the people that play that sports.
Yeah.
I think it works with that, and it really ties into my next point, which is be prepared not to like the first pieces that you write. Man, I look back on the first true choral piece that I sat down and said, I'm going to write it. I was really inspired by Morton Lauridsen. I was going to do
Hmm.
a setting of Sure on This Shining Night.
Oh
And
gosh.
I sat down and I wrote this piece. And I had the confidence to show it to somebody. It was Jake Navarud. And after that, he helped me to go on and actually start actually writing music. So, like, thank you to that piece. I went back
Yeah.
in like 2019. I was scrolling through my old desktop, found this piece, listened to it, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is disgusting. And I threw it away in a very Brahmsian fashion. Brahms, for future reference, he often threw away manuscripts that he didn't like. So we, as musicologists and music historians, have no idea what Brahms's edits looked like. We don't really know what
Yeah.
his ideas looked like outside of his finished music, because whatever he didn't like, he just threw it away, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate. I usually don't do that. I don't subscribe to that, but this piece was just so abysmal that I threw it away. I was like, I'm never going to use that, and there's no reason it should exist. So I threw it away.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I think of Sibelius later in life. He later in life, Sibelius was really harsh on himself, and he burned a lot of his manuscripts. The Corellius suite, which is a very beloved orchestral suite of his. There were parts of it that he burned because he didn't like it. But it kind of goes to the points that we're talking about, later symphonies and stuff like that, that he didn't like and stuff like that. We talk about how much Sibelius disliked those pieces, but we love those pieces. So it kind of goes to what we're talking about. Other people might love that stuff, even though you hate it with every fiber of your being, but it doesn't matter because, again, we are our own worst enemies when it comes to this type of stuff. And ultimately, you kind of just can't trust yourself and you have to trust that it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because again, we get in our heads about these things. So, it's really just one of those things that we struggle with. It's important for us to talk about the struggles that we face as composers with, all this crap that we deal with. um, and so, uh, yes, but, and talking about other composers, the last note I have written here is the importance of listening to all kinds of music related to what you're trying to achieve. What composer has done it before? This is super important, and I think it's mostly overlooked. Even in academia, even when you're studying composition, I think the importance of listening is sometimes more overlooked than it should be. Um, you have to be an obsessive listener as a composer. You need to be willing to listen to everything. And not only that, but if you're embarking on this new piece and you know what you want this piece to be, again, you're making that roadmap for yourself, you're getting ideas, you're getting inspiration, and you're, building your palette from which you will compose with. And so, a good thing for you to do is to think about those ideas that you've come up with and look for pieces where, the composer has done that same thing that you're trying to do. Where you got that inspiration from, go to the source of the inspiration. What piece was that you're thinking of that gave you that idea? Go listen to it. It's really important for you to do that because those composers will give you ideas. Because you two managed to match up with that one idea, but that composer did a bunch of things that you're not going to do. So it's really important for you to seek out that piece and listen to it so they can give you even more ideas in the process, because it's not going to be an exact replica, obviously, because you're two different composers. But it's important for you to garner interest from those sources of inspiration, and you're basically having composition lessons with those composers because you're dissecting those pieces and you're determining exactly how they did the things that they did in those pieces, how they took those ideas that you're now having and how they wrote those ideas into pieces can be really useful. um, a lot of times when I'm working on pieces, I have just a certain collection of pieces that I have on repeat constantly, like sickeningly, like I'm just listening to the same stuff. And the reason why is because I'm really trying to get to the very core of those pieces through repeated listening. And often I'll buy the scores for those pieces as well, so I can actually look at the music, see how it was written down, all that good kind of stuff. And it allows me to get more granular. I can see the really specific stuff. But again, repeated listening of these pieces helps me really dissect them, and you know all those ideas that those composers were using, I can write those using my own voice into my pieces. So listening is very important, and you need to do a lot of it. And take it seriously, seeking out the music that you're going to be listening to when you're writing your piece, because it will directly influence what you're writing, because you ultimately garner ideas from what you listen to. So it's
Yeah.
smart to just go to the source and own up to it.
Yeah. And so this is where I think Jesse and I, and this is totally okay, and we kind of divert in opposite directions in our philosophy, is that if I was knew that I was going to, so a real world thing in my requiem, I'm actually messed around with the text that I've used in some of the settings, and I actually am including the Beaticorum Via in the Benedictus. And the only setting I've ever heard, and the only setting that I ever want to hear, is the one by Owain Park. I'm intimately familiar with that piece. I've sung it multiple times. I love that music. here's the thing: when it's time for me to write that piece, I'm not going to listen to Owain Park. I do not want to listen to Owain Park. I want to stay as far away from Owain Park as possible because I'm afraid that because I know that piece so well and I've spent so much time letting that piece marinate, that I'm going to write something that isn't necessarily mine. And I think that
Mm,
I think you can over influence, you can over marinate ideas to the point where it's kind of like almost plagiarism. And I want to stay as far away from that as possible. I don't want anybody to be able to pick up a
mm,
score of mine and then say, huh, that sounds familiar. Go look at Owain Park because
right.
they sang his piece. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, they're really similar. And then I actually did that once and it was not on purpose.
Yeah.
But I did something like that once. I had to
Right.
completely rewrite a piece.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important that if you want to do that, you definitely should. But also, I think it's super smart to spend time away from the pieces that have directly influenced your train of thought so that you also don't just copy them
Right.
accidentally and include a bunch of that stuff
Yeah.
in it.
And I should mention that I should advise you to not listen to just one piece. If you listen to just one piece, you will rip off that piece. So when I talk about how I have that collection of pieces that I always listen to, it's always more than one piece. And the reason for that is because when I listen to all these different pieces that have similar goals, I can let all of those ideas from those different composers and those different pieces all coalesce into what I'm going to deliver.
Mhm.
So there's is kind of a method to that. I try not to listen to one piece because of the reasoning that Colby's talking about. If you listen to one piece, or at least with me, if I listen to one piece, I'm gonna just rip off that piece, and it's not good. You know, it's not good form.
Yeah.
So I try to find multiple pieces that relate to the kind of piece that I'm trying to write, and will draw influence from all those different sources, so I'm not just ripping off one. So so I think it's important to listen to multiple pieces, as I think every composer should on default listen to a bunch of different pieces. But when you're drawing inspiration, I think it's really important to make sure you're listening to multiple pieces and not just one, so you
Yeah.
don't rip off that one piece.
For sure. Yeah. And it's not only bad form, it's hashtag illegal because
Yeah.
hashtag international copyright law. So
Yeah,
don't do
it's
that.
against the law.
Yeah. It's not only kind of, as the kids say, a dick move, but it's also like definitely not something you should be doing because it's illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, we are entering the closing stages here of
Hmm.
tonight's episode. And we've actually formulated something that we want to extend to you, you, our audience base. We have a quote unquote assignment for you. We want you to write 16 measures for an instrument that you are familiar with in either Mixolydian or Lydian mode. That's a really great starting point to take something in a mode.
Hmm.
Um, and we would love it if you shared it with us. And even if you don't share it with us, just try it out. Give it a shot. Even if you aren't a composer, just give it a shot and see if you
Yeah.
discover something about
Yeah.
yourself that you didn't know. And then if you do want to send it to us, you can do that podcast.musicallyinclined@gmail.com. That's our email. And if you want to do that through Instagram, you can hit us up at musically inclined PC. That is once again at musically inclined PC on Instagram. So yeah, we kind of have this little assignment for you. If nobody does it, that's totally fine. But if you do want to do that, you want to bounce your idea off of us, we would love to take a look at it and discuss it with you here in the near future.
No, yeah, that definitely do. If you're brave enough, definitely do. We would love to look at your music and give you a little technique critique, very nicely, obviously. But we would love to look at your music. We obviously we bounce ideas off of each other all the time, as we've talked about nonstop.
Yeah.
But we love to extend that opportunity to you, because we're all colleagues here. We're all in the same boat. So if you would like, we would love to give you a little critique of your music. It helps all of us, honestly. It doesn't just help you, but it also helps us
Yeah.
because we can take our own thoughts and apply it to our own work.
Yeah.
So
It
yeah.
also helps us know that you are indeed engaging with us, which is something that we desperately want to
Yes.
have with you, is create discourse. So a quick announcement. I have two quick announcements. The first being shameless self plug. Tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. This is Wednesday, May 12th. If you are available, I am giving my first of two composition recitals for one of my bachelor's degrees here at Kansas State University. That will be through YouTube Premiere. You can find that on my website, www.kolbyvancamp.com. It's right there on the homepage. It's also on a Facebook event. I would love to see you there after tomorrow night's premiere broadcast. There will be a live chat. So if you want to talk with me and you want to do that live, now is your opportunity to do that. That is 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Go find it on my website, www.kolbyvancamp.com. And then the next thing is that we are going to have our very first guest on the show next week. It is a fantastic guy and composer by the name of Alex Joaquim. I knew Alex once upon a time. I think he graduated from K State with a bachelor's of music and composition when I was a freshman, and that was a long time ago now, since I just finished my senior year here at Kansas State. So he's going to be on the show. He's a real life composer in the Big Apple, New York City. He traded the Little Apple, Manhattan, for the Big Apple, New York, and he does some great stuff. Went to NYU, got a master's degree in composition, and he's been doing some really fun stuff with film music and music theater. So we're going to have him on the show next week. We're just going to do a Q&A with him, ask him about his process, ask him about the kind of music that he's into, what he writes, and just kind of make it a fun show. So if you want to hear somebody other than us talk, then next week is going to be the week for you. Alex Joaquim will indeed be joining us.
Yep.
If you would like to follow us on Instagram one last time, you can hit us up at Musically Inclined PC, at Musically Inclined PC, and then you can also email us podcast.musicallyinclined@gmail.com.
Mhm. And don't worry, we've got a long list of guests that we've been talking about, of possibilities of guests. So there will be multiple opportunities for you to also listen to someone else talk. And, as we say, all kinds of people, from really big professionals, the whole spectrum is represented in the guests that we're thinking about talking to on this show. So we've got some exciting stuff coming. So be sure to stay tuned.
Absolutely. So without further ado, thank you for listening to tonight's show. My name is Kolby Van Camp.
And my name is Jesse Kaiser. You've been listening to Musically Inclined.